elsewhere in the organization. Where's the savings?
Number one, politically correct. Not all of those buyers are going to be transitioned. Some of them are going to be out of jobs. And some of them are going to be transitioned to work more efficiently. Like any answer, there's no black and white solution. The organization, for example, that I used as a reference went down from 23 to 3, didn't find jobs for all those 20. They may have found jobs for those 10 because they're working more efficiently. Each organization is uniquely different, even within the same industries. So savings in process time is not just people headcount, which can be achieved. It's also in terms of not having to handle the same orders 40% of the time, not go through the vetting process in terms of P-card analysis. Efficiencies go beyond just the simple cost of goods and just headcount. It encompasses those things, but it extends much further because you become more intelligent when you buy. You then focus your energies on those things which are most productive, whether it's an event-centric or a transaction-centric auction. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, please.
I went and got a copy of the research report that we were talking about earlier, and the question we asked was, the U.S. data. The question was, does your company have contracted power transmission vendors? 45% of the companies responded to U.S. and what percentage of your purchases are made from non-contracted local vendors? So it's the purchases, and I'm going to say that that's the dollar, it's not the transaction. And John mentioned later in the presentation in the U.S. that off-contract percentage is much lower than it was in Canada. It's more like a median of 27% for design engineering, 32% for plan engineering, and 26% for purchasing. But this report, by the way, is available to all of you online at PTA's website if you want information on how to get access to it. You can talk to any of us out at the desk later.
By the way, thank you. And by the way, it's a good report. You know, in terms of statistics and associations that I've dealt with, this was actually one of the better ones. Yes?
One of the things that I'm hearing here is this whole relationship thing. And I think what I'm hearing is these things fail sometimes because you've got three suppliers, A, B, and C. A maybe has the best price and makes the purchaser look good. Maybe the frontline manager's like B, so they got a relationship. Maybe the guy out on the floor who's working with this product says, I really want C because this helps me do my job. And somehow I think what it seems this whole reverse auction is getting is somehow trying to tie this whole thing together and realize that until you've got A, B, and C and three lines all working together, this thing's bound to fail.
You're absolutely, you hit the nail. I'm just going to go back to, by the way, see how good I am at this? That's why, I can watch a show in 10 seconds and know whether or not I like it. Okay, that was mildly funny, right? I don't have to do card tricks or anything. You're absolutely right. You see, and often the decisions making, and that can be incorporated, you have multiple reasons for making a purchasing decision, and usually the approach has been very myopic. There was one organization who said, what you have to do is you have to force feed it down. You hear the terms change management, you hear all of these things. Change management is one of the 6 key components they identified, or is identified as being part of a successful procurement or an e-procurement initiative. But unless you combine, you have 3 different varying points. Unless they come together and are addressed to the satisfaction, and then, I'll go a step further, are expanded to include the external transactional stakeholders or the trading partners, you're not going to succeed. And that's the point. The Covason initiative was an example. It was promoted as the poster child of solutions, and it didn't work. Now, again, it wasn't just internal forces, it was external. But you're right. You have to have a meeting of the minds, or that where each of those 3 areas, and then ultimately extending beyond, external trading partners' requirements are achieved. And again, that's done through understanding and focusing on process and not getting caught up in the technology. Now, I don't mean to diminish technology. It's important. And that's a topic for another discussion, the difference between equation-based modeling, which is what the majority of Oracles and SAP use, which is develop the systems based upon an environment of assumptive interaction, versus agent-based modeling, or even getting into even more advanced DASH, dynamic analysis of supply chains, agent-based modeling, which reflects the unique operating attributes of all transactional stakeholders, and understanding how they work separately. Only then can you understand how you can bring them together to work as an efficient tool. And that's the key. So, yes? No questions? All right. So I guess let me give you just a couple of little questions PTDA posed for me. How am I doing for time, by the way? Because I could talk about this all day. And now we go ahead. All right. Some of the questions that were posed. Where is the technology going? It'll finally tie into real-world process, the way in which the real world operates. And that's what you had alluded to, is bringing this all together under an understanding of the different areas, A, B, and C. More specifically, what's important to the enterprise, not only individually in the segments, but collectively, and then extending beyond. The traditional equation-based modeling for all purchases, event-centric auctions for all purchases, and moving into a more dynamic environment that reflects how the world operates. What size company can benefit from the utilization of a reverse auction? In the old days, with traditional applications, you've got to be pretty big to spend $650 million or $120 million. With the way the industry is going now, smaller companies will be able to get in. It's going to become more like a utility. Organizations will pay a low cost of entry, some as low as $1,000, and pay transaction fees based on usage, which, by the way, will motivate the software providers to create a solution that actually gets used. Because if you don't turn on your lights, you don't pay the bill. And so the whole idea is to create solutions that are actually utilized in the real world. What sectors are currently utilizing reverse auctions? There's a broad sector. It seems to be the areas that are emerging the most are higher education and government. Now, again, there's all kinds of companies out there in Canada and the U.S. who offer event-centric auctions, but the governments are really starting to look at that and the education. Part of that is because of in the government's case, they have to become more accountable for what they're spending. True cost auditing, the ability to justify what they're doing. In the terms of higher education institutions, ties into not just trying to drive best value, but again, budget constraints. But it's starting to expand and grow industry-wide because it's being perceived as a process tool, not a technological tool. And that's where the thinking's going. What impact does service and quality have on the bid process? How is this measured? Well, again, let's balance it off. You go through an event-centric auction, they go through the RFX process, they choose the right suppliers, the questionnaires are answered, hours, days are spent to put together the RFP to become approved. And so on that basis, that's the filtering. The challenge of that, of course, is if nobody buys off the catalog or the approved or the standing offer, that exercise has been somewhat futile. On the other side, emerging technologies for the areas of procurement and the commodity items that are conducive to that are going to incorporate algorithms, intelligent algorithms that simultaneously will link. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't help but disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't think that they spend any time at all analyzing the RFQs once they've sent them out. They go directly to the price auction. We get on a phone call, and those who cut the price are those who get the business. I can't stand here and listen to you tell me how much time they spend analyzing the quotes. They don't. They don't do dick. That's the problem.
All right. All right. First of all, a very observant point. However, I'm not speaking for the buyers. I think, again, if you were to ask me on my personal thing, I agree with you 110%. I don't know to what degree they do the analysis of the RFXs, and ultimately, I think the easiest point, you're right, is that when push comes to shove, go to price. When push comes to shove, go to price. And that's what makes literally the effort of going through RFPs and cataloging useless, because it consumes your time. How much money do you spend doing that? And you end up with a fraction. What?
Too damn much time putting out these RFQs, so all we do is end up in price.
That, absolutely.
Just chewing up dollars, period, in time for something that's going to bring me no return.
Absolutely, and that's why the technology is moving away, and that's why, by the way, these solutions aren't working. Why did Covacent fail? Why did Ford get rid of their Everest initiative? Why did organizations like the VA, after $650 million, fail? For the very reason you're talking about. They created a process which didn't deliver any of the promise to the participating suppliers for whatever reason, only to have buyers not use the system. And what you created then is a futile exercise. By focusing on process, what you're going to start to do is focus those RFP or RFX activities on those areas which really can benefit from them. The fact is there's a general lack of knowledge and a general lack of information in terms of buys. And that's the key. And through this process of analysis, they're going to choose those commodities which are conducive, which are necessary in terms of that. And I think they'll be in terms of still doing RFPs, but I think you're going to find over the next 12 to 18 months that at least 30% to 40% of the commodity groups being purchased will be moved from that. Because they themselves, and I'm talking about governments, they themselves have realized that the RFP process has been an exercise in futility. Because nobody uses them, and the bid analysis and the time consumption, all it does is create jobs for people spitting out the RFPs and no more. So I agree with you on that. I just can't come up here necessarily and tell you and speak badly of the buyer side of the equation, but I can tell you that more and more buyers are realizing it. And remember I said at the very beginning of this conversation, you have to come away thinking of something and how it's going to affect you. You now have to look, knowing that this is happening, for those buyer relationships that are starting to talk about these kinds of characteristics, because those are the ones you're going to start to transition to. You will not get a wipeout of all those other people who go through that exercise and are just price, 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 because it's the easiest point. But there is a trend emerging where people are starting to get away from the RFP process and start to incorporate intelligent procurement tools that eliminates that, levels the playing field, and reduces the costs. So it's a good observation you made. Any other questions? I hear mumbling. Is that a good sign? Or is that we're hungry and we want to have a coffee break? All right. So, in terms of what's measured in terms of value, with the advent of intelligent algorithms, you no longer have to go through that RFP process. The system on real time empowers the buyer on the front line when they're making the decision based upon real performance characteristics. There's suppliers who may lowball on a price, but if they've had historic delivery problems, quality problems, aren't offering favorable terms, that information will be captured immediately and reflected in the rankings for the suppliers, and not only empower them to do an immediate buy based on that value, but create the audit trail to prove its value. And that's the key, the data capturing and the knowledge and the business intelligence that comes from. So that's where, and by the way, the algorithms are becoming more complex. They're multi-tiered algorithms, service-related algorithms. We met with the Royal Bank about a month and a half ago, and they're talking about the expense of temporary services, of legal services. Algorithms are the future of procurement because they provide an instantaneous measurement in real time of supplier capabilities and match it with the buyers in terms of what their main objectives are. How are suppliers selected for the bid process? I think you just hit the nail on the head back there again. Come in, go through, fill out an RFX, we'll go through, blah, 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 filter it down, and then you'll get selected based on your value. And it does come down to price, again, because the buyers at the VA, for example, said we can pick up the phone and get a better price. And you've gone through the whole exercise of building a value-based relationship with all the services. I'll tell you something, the service you offer, the buyer doesn't see it. The decision-making point, especially in MRO, they don't see it. So you have to understand what you're competing on. And so the key area is that with the emerging transactional or transaction-centric auctions, real-time data will be put in place. And you'll be measured on the value of what you provide. And the cost of you being able to get into the game will be much lower than going through an exercise of an RFX. But I want to caution, it's not a broad statement across all commodity groupings. And that's why you have to know the commodity groups, the floor-to-ceiling price range, and how they impact it. What preparation is required to effectively participate in a reverse auction? From a technical standpoint, they're going away from the suppliers having to pay a fee. Ariba made an announcement, you're all familiar, they boast having one of the largest supplier networks. You know their suppliers have to pay to be on that network? Some states charge their suppliers money to participate. That convolutes and literally denigrates the bid process. because that's money that you have to pay, and you've got to recover that somewhere. So what's happening outside of the technical standpoint of the simplicity of the engagement through the Metaprice model with email addresses and simple web access is getting rid of, if you will, the supplier having to pay pricing. From a supplier's perspective and yours, you have to do homework in terms of what buyers do you want to engage, which ones are more price sensitive and which ones are forward thinking and reflecting the way the trend is going. And search out these kinds of customers, and you'll get your greater rewards as you begin to make the transition over. But not all customers are going to make this transition at once. But in the next 12 to 18 months, it'll be the biggest period in procurement, because procurement is a key word on everyone's lips, whether private or public enterprise. Now, remember that piece of paper you had at the beginning where I said write down why you think they can help you or why you think it can hurt you? Some of you probably did. If we have the time, certainly I'd be more than happy to welcome a few of you to read what you said at the beginning and then say, has that changed your mind any, or has what changed in terms of your perspective? And we got our friend with the microphone there, so who'd like to stand up and read that? No one? Come on, I did see some pens going. All right. You know what, by the way, you're a man after my own heart, because I'm equally shy.
I wrote down it'll have a negative effect on my business.
Okay.
All right? And the reason for that is you just talked about them passing the charges down of these RFQs, right? They pass down to us. The reverse effect should be that we should charge them to do it, since initially they're going to save money. But it's costing us nothing but money to do these so that they can go right down to the price point.
Yeah.
So they should be charged an hourly rate. We've got all our people working on these things while we could be selling to our good customers. Here we are pricing out these huge quotations for somebody who is just trying to get the best price, nothing more.
Right. And that's the key of the algorithms, and that's the key of the difference between event-centric and transaction-centric auctions, is that transaction-centric auctions focus not just on price, but they incorporate automatically into the purchasing process without the need to go through an RFQ, incorporate and engage suppliers based on what their capabilities are in terms of delivery and quality. And each and every transaction that happens, the system gets more and more intelligent. I won't call it artificial intelligence, but it learns. And so what ends up happening is you get the wheat separating from the chaff, I guess it's either way, tomato. You get that happening. And we see it right now in some of the industries, the early adopter industries, where you have suppliers, and you'll like this. And I wish I had an overhead of it. In the bid process in the computer spare parts industry, remember I mentioned the price range between $200 and $3,000? And I'll give you two interesting examples that you'll be very pleased with of what this does. With the advanced algorithms, the bid was broadcast at the push of the button out to hundreds of suppliers. Suppliers responded, put in their price. The system's algorithms take into account the weight and importance of quality, delivery. The cheapest supplier, the supplier with the cheapest or second cheapest price, was ranked last because he had quality and delivery issues. And that's the whole essence of what's emerging in the technology. The systems are sophisticated enough to catch that kind of crap, because let's face it, and I'd go you a step further, those people who end up buying on price are probably the ones who end up having 40% of all their transactions having to redo with either wrong invoicing information, poor quality, or wrong part shipped. The key is that the intelligent systems that are emerging and will be emerging incorporate all those factors to eliminate it and award the business to the company that is most capable of doing it. And if that buyer in that ranking decided to go with the cheapest price, if the company wanted to give them that kind of authority at that level, they would do it, but the buyer is now accountable because the system will not let them process the order unless they put in a reason for the exception. That's the effectiveness of incorporating real-time objective algorithms into a procurement process. You eliminate the necessity of RFPs by empowering the buyers with tools that take into account in real time, right up to the last transaction, true supplier capabilities. I'm going to touch on another thing you found interesting. Sorry, just give me one more minute. The government, the D&D, did a bid. And they went in and said, we're going to save money. It was an amazing process. We're going to go in there and set a watermark of 7% markup as the target. And any supplier who bids that's over that 7% for each percentage point, they're going to get penalized $100,000. Any supplier that's under that 7% will get credited $100,000. So what ends up happening is they choose the 4% supplier over the 12% supplier. Remember the commodity savings rank and the floor to ceiling? Pose this question because they discovered it. The 4% supplier was buying inefficiently or providing at the $3,000 mark, and the 12% markup supplier was at the $200 to $300 mark. Where was the buyer's best value? Was it in the 4% markup or the 12%? That's the intelligence that's happening and that organizations are starting to realize. You have to be able to know the numbers. You have to understand the commodity savings rank, what your floor and ceiling is. Otherwise, you're going to make what you think is a good decision on price, which will turn out to cost you even more. And that's the touch of the two areas that are happening that are driving this momentous change over the next 12 to 18 months.
Basically, you've just reaffirmed for what I believed when we walked in the room, is that this is not going to be the way of the future for our style of business. What we've done to really be able to drive the cost out of this system is to be able to electronically communicate back and forth. And to do that, you've basically commoditized your product. And everybody in this room, I would think, spends most of their time trying to upsell, value add, whatever you want to do, and get true value for our customers. And to have a reverse bid, all you've done is part numbered your product line. And the next bid around, all people are going to do is go price and delivery. And to Bob's point, I agree 100%. We will do anything possible to try and make this process more difficult because in the long run, it costs our customers money. It costs us a lot of time.
Yep. No, and again, a valid point, discerning the differences. First of all, when you go into a customer or buyer analysis, look at what the commodity ranks are. Commodity groupings have the impact on where a particular application or initiative will bring about the best results. It's not, you see, that's the trouble with most industry. They apply one rule across their entire enterprise. It doesn't work that way. There are certain commodities or components that are purchased that, first of all purchases, and that's the advent of intelligent algorithms, all purchases have to take into account the added value beyond price. The emerging algorithm-based systems will do that. The traditional equation-based or the event-centric auctions, and according to the analysis, which is very true, won't result in anything. But you have to, first of all, start in a couple of areas. Identify the commodity groupings by which you're involved. Know what the floor-to-ceiling price is that your buyers are seeing. Know the decision or the impact of their decisions, and understand the tools they're going to use to make their buying decisions. Because as suppliers, you're going to run into this, and it's not just indigenous, again, to your industry. It's a complaint in all industries across the board. Because at the end, and I use that example of insurance, when there's a lot of claims, it's the policyholders who pay. The key is you have to discern which commodity groups are conducive to what kind of spend. Focus your energy on those areas which produce the best results, and there are some transactional basis that certain commodities will be most beneficial, and there are other ones where the more traditional methods will be more beneficial. But you're going to find a defining moment of where they're starting to segment it and understand it intelligently based on their actual spend data and what they want to achieve. And then even in those items that are commoditized to a certain degree, the reality is that price alone doesn't necessarily mean you've made a good decision. Quality, delivery, terms offered, all of those factors and more are part of the decision-making process. And the example I gave was that lowest supplier in terms of price was ranked at the bottom because the intelligence catches all of those key elements of a value-based transaction. And what you have to do as a supplier is search out those relationships with the buyers and get in the head of your buyers and understand what's driving their initiatives. So again, it's not a blanket, but there's certainly, again, very unique characteristics by commodity group and then by span, and even within span, certain capabilities that remove just the price. Sorry.
Algorithms require history. Algorithms require history, and so if there's a new distributor, a new customer coming on the stream who hasn't got a history, does it not come back to price?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. With the and you sort of hit the nail on the head on two fronts. Number one, the longer you get into the process, the more history there is, the more valuable the algorithms become. However, as you add on new suppliers, they're incorporated in, and algorithms give you the flexibility of two things. Number one, if you don't want to incorporate it into the decision-making process, you don't have to. You can just highlight the number of transactions you've done with this supplier. So then at that level, the buyer can then make a decision. This is a new supplier. The price is good. Should I check it out further? Is it really a fly-by-night, especially if the price differential is 20% or higher? That's number one. Number two, you can incorporate that into the algorithm. I'll use the example with supplier diversity initiatives in the U.S., is that some of them want to gear towards minority-owned businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises, women-owned businesses. You can actually incorporate that into the algorithm process where penalty points are assigned for suppliers that don't fall within a certain category. So what you could do is level the playing field with new suppliers, if you want, at the point of decision-making, and incorporate it to say, okay, new suppliers, until they prove themselves, will get a little bit of either a manual observation that we don't have a lot of transactions with them and check them out, or we'll build in so it'll level the playing field with existing suppliers. But the key is that the transition to these systems and the history starts building from day one. And the system's value become more valuable 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, because you never lose that data and never lose that intelligence. But you've got to start somewhere. Did that answer your question? Any other questions or comments? Anyone else had something to say in terms of what they believed reverse auctions could or couldn't do? How much time do... This is the last question.
I just have a question as an end user where of MRO, for example. Most MRO you purchase through inventory. How do you do that in a reverse auction situation where in like current systems using Oracle or whatever it may be, you've got catalogs, you've got all of that detail that restocks your inventory and so forth. How does that happen in a reverse auction?
Company inventory, it has been told by many people, inventory is death. The longer and the more inventory you have, the greater the cost. More and more organizations are implementing unique processes called parts compression function, where they're trying to minimize the amount of inventory they carry. Because remember, when you create a catalog environment and then carry inventory to support that, literally what ends up happening is there's not just the cost of carrying that inventory and price fluctuations, again referring to the commodity rank, there is a potential impact there. But more and more organizations are saying we want to move towards a just-in-time accessibility. We don't want to necessarily carry large inventories or have to deal with somebody to carry necessarily large inventories. We just want to know when we need the product on consumption that we're not into a contractual arrangement or we've created a standing offer where we're saying we're going to buy 8 million when we only buy 2. We want the effectiveness of being able to limit the amount of inventory as a buyer and we want to be able to have accessibility to a real-time market, which reflects, again, the current market conditions, not only in price but availability. So you're going to find that more and more organizations, depending on the commodity rank, are going to be moving away from inventorying or keeping an inventory that they have to maintain and manage and going into an area where they can buy in the real time and effectively get delivery on an international basis. Did that answer your question? All right. I'd like to, again, thank you for your time today. It was very interesting. I always like getting in front of people and engaging, and certainly I enjoyed that gentleman in the back, again, your observations. I'm going to, by the way, I think I'll take you with me on all of my presentations because you really got everybody going there. But thank you so much, and just I'd like to turn it back over to Kelly.
By the content of the first speaker that it's going to be an exciting day. John, thank you very much for your presentation. It was certainly insightful, and you've certainly given all of us a lot to think about. At this point, we'd like to break to give you, all of you folks, a chance to refresh your coffee. Coffee will be served at the back of the room this morning. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Machinery and Equipment, MRO Magazine, for their generous support in underwriting the cost of our morning coffee break. In addition, for the generous support through free advertising for the conference and their continual editorial support for the PTDA and this conference. We'll reconvene promptly at 10:45 a.m. for our second presentation. Thank you.